Good morning, buenos días, buen día. Good morning to everyone. I'm Rodrigo Bonilla, Regional Director for the Americas at WAN-IFRA's office in Mexico City. We're extremely excited to be hosting this webinar today, focused on maybe not a new topic, but definitely one of the hottest topics in the industry for several years now, which is reader revenue and digital subscription models. And before jumping into the session and introducing our speakers, and as we wait for other participants to join the session, we'd love to share some internal WAN-IFRA reminders of some of the activities that are upcoming in the coming months. We want to share this save the date for our regional annual conference, Digital Media LATAM. Many of you are very familiar with this conference that we've been holding now for almost 8 years. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do it physically, and this time it will be held virtually once again. But please save the date because we will be covering, amongst other topics, reader revenue as one of the key strategies for publishers today, specifically in LATAM, where we're seeing this pivot to this type of strategies becoming more and more familiar and more common in the region. The other thing we wanted to remind you is that right now our awards the entries for awards are open, the applications are open. These are Digital Media Awards LATAM. They'll be open until July 29th. Again, this is the 6th edition of these awards. We have 10 categories where companies from across the region can present their best digital products. And please don't hesitate to check our website and apply your best projects of the year. And now we're going to go more into detail of the session. As you know, some housekeeping first. We have the possibility of listening to this session, which will be held in English. You can listen to it in Spanish and Portuguese. You just need to choose your language in the toolbar that appears on one of the sides of your screen. You can choose Portuguese and English for the whole session. We have more than 300 registered participants from 153 companies from 23 countries. So we're super excited to have this audience. And why are we excited to hold this webinar? Because it's been the culmination of months of work and dedication helping 8 publishers across the region develop a more robust reader revenue strategy. There's been so many learnings and lessons that have come out of this project, which is basically the first GNI subscription lab to which Mather Economics WAN-IFRA participated to, and that was led by the Google News Initiative. So here, the objective of the session is to provide our audience with the key findings of this project, which have been put together in a free, in-depth, insightful report that will be published and made available to all registered participants. And for this session in particular, we have a great speaker lineup. We have Luciana Cardoso. Luciana is Chief Product Officer at Estado de Sao Paulo in Brazil. She worked a long period at IBM Latin America before she joined Estado in 2011. She's always worked in the digital area, closely following the creation of the company's new products. She has a degree in information systems and a master's in journalism, and will be joining the conversation. We also have Natalia Pisa, who's Director of Digital Monetization at El Espectador in Colombia. In 2018, she was a professional fellow for Latin America at the ACFJ. She's a graduate journalist in 2009 from Universidad Javeriana in Colombia and has a master's degree in creative writing from Universidad Nacional of Colombia. She has worked in different companies in Colombia. She worked in Semana as a digital journalist. She worked at Revista Soho, and she moved to El Espectador in 2016, where she has been spearheading the pivot to reader revenue strategy at the Colombian newspaper. We have Arun Venkataraman. Arun is a global strategy lead at the Google News Initiative in the US. Over the past couple of years, he's overseen the GNI's portfolio in LATAM and led many of the GNI's reader revenue labs across the world, including the one in LATAM. He is the global co-lead of the recently launched Digital Growth Program and primary author of the GNI Reader Revenue Report. And we have Arvid Chifsel, who's Managing Director of Digital Services at Macroeconomics. Arvid it brings over 12 years of experience translating data and analytics into action. Arvid is also the resident subject matter expert on digital media and technology in the company and has advised hundreds of respected global brands, amongst which many media companies, with digital transformation strategy and implementation. What will be today's rundown? We will first hear from Arun and Arvid, who'll go deep into the key findings of the report. They'll also present some information specifically from Estadao and El Espectador that they will comment with Luciana and Natalia. And then after that section of the session, we will open up for questions from the audience. We have some questions we've prepared for Luciana and Natalia particularly, but also we'll be open for questions at the end of the report presentation. So now, again, remember to choose the language of your choice. Remember to leave, you can start leaving your questions in the Q&A section, also in the toolbar. As you hear the session, feel free to leave your questions there. You can leave them in the language of your choice. We'll translate them to the speakers. And now I pass it over to Arun to kick off the report presentation. Welcome and have a great session.
Great, thank you so much, Rodrigo. Buenos dias, bom dia. Good morning, good afternoon to all. It is such a pleasure for Arvid and I and Luciana and Natalia to be here and share with you the culmination, as Rodrigo mentioned, takeaways from work that's taken place over the last 2 years, and work that we think really led to some interesting insights and takeaways that can help inform subscription strategies for publishers, not only in Latin America, but all across the world. And just want to give another huge thank you to Rodrigo and Daniela and Raquel and the entire WAN-IFRA team for their constant, unwavering support throughout this entire project. So we'll jump into just providing a little bit of an overview on the project itself, the lab. So the subscriptions lab that we ran in Latin America is a part of a broader portfolio of labs that we've run through the Google News Initiative across the world. In Latin America, the program was an 18-month-long effort, and the purpose primarily was to help bring digital subscriptions, best practices, and approaches. We worked very deeply with 8 Latin American news publishers, Estadao and El Espectador being 2 of them, and you'll hear more about their experiences later today. As we've mentioned, it was a joint effort between the Google News Initiative, WAN-IFRA LATAM, and Mather Economics. Throughout the course of the project, each publisher received a personalized readiness assessment, essentially an audit, a set of strategic recommendations, benchmarks, and then a detailed data analysis alongside customized tactical recommendations. We use those reports to help inform more than 20 A/B tests that publishers performed throughout the course of the lab. And when we look at the kind of impact of the lab, collectively it generated about $7.2 million in incremental value, which is about $30 million over a 5-year lifetime value forecast. And the A/B tests themselves generated about $2 million, which is about a $10 million lifetime value. But the impact aside, I think the real value we all got from the lab was in reinforcing some of the lessons that we had learned about what it takes to be able to build and optimize a subscriptions model, but also some of the new takeaways and insights that we hadn't seen before and that we're excited to share with you today. The lab did reinforce for us a number of factors that are critical for for building a successful subscriptions model everywhere. So it first and foremost, it starts off with developing high quality content that readers are willing to pay for. the content is the product when you're a news organization. It reinforced for us the importance of deepening engagement with readers to increase their likelihood to subscribe. And we'll talk about some of the tactics for doing just that in a little bit. It reinforced for us the importance of building a direct relationship with readers, which oftentimes means taking an anonymous reader or user and turning them into a known reader, essentially someone that you have an email address for and can build a direct relationship with. This becomes ever more important as we migrate to a cookieless world. The other kind of key factor here that we've routinely seen is the importance of maximizing subscription sales opportunities while minimizing advertising revenue loss. What is the right place to put the paywall? What is the right amount of premium content to host as a part of your subscription strategy to minimize the impact on your advertising revenue losses and really maximize your subscription sales opportunities? And we learned some interesting takeaways on that front. Minimizing friction in the purchase process. So making it as easy as possible for publishers to subscribe. Retaining your subscribers once you have them. So once you have a subscriber, being able to retain those subscribers over the long run is absolutely critical to the long-term health of your subscriptions model. And then finally, increasing average revenue per user where possible over time. So this typically means with more tenured subscribers, subscribers that you've been able to prove the value proposition to, a strategy we've seen throughout the industry is increasing that average revenue per user over time as a way to grow your overall subscriptions opportunity. So these factors were ones that we went into the lab more or less with an understanding of, and that we had seen historically had been important for publishers as they built out their subscriptions model. But what was interesting for us was the things we learned specifically from the GNI Latin America Subscriptions Lab. And you'll see all of these takeaways in much more detail in the report that Rodrigo alluded to before. You can sign up for it. It's free. You'll get a link to the report over email. We won't go into each one of these takeaways. We'll focus on just a few, but I did want to highlight them here just to give you an understanding of the flavor of those takeaways and to give you a sense of what might be interesting in the context of your own news organization. So first, we learned that when a reader consumes content across multiple topics, they're more likely to subscribe. We also learned that less than half of all the digital content that newsrooms produced was actually consumed by readers on their path to subscription. We learned that the value proposition for subscribers, particularly in Latin America, oftentimes extends beyond journalism and to a level probably more than we've seen in other regions. So there's an increasing reliance, or there is a reliance on discounts and coupons on goods and services as a part of the subscriptions offer to Latin American readers. There are diminishing returns on propensity to subscribe from increasing visit frequency. This is a really interesting takeaway, and we'll talk about it in more detail in just a little bit. It reinforced for us just the importance of growing the number of known users, so users that are newsletter subscribers that you have email addresses for. This is the most important factor for increasing subscriptions propensity or subscriptions likelihood, or the likelihood to subscribe. And then we also learned that publishers generally can afford to adopt more restrictive paywall strategies than they do currently, that they overestimate the impact on ad revenue, and that they across the board can usually be a little bit tighter with where they're setting their paywalls, meaning setting their paywall meters at a lower level than they typically have. We also learned that the risk of losing advertising revenue by shifting to a more aggressive subscription strategy is generally limited. That increasing the number of times a reader hits a paywall does make them more likely to subscribe, but that likelihood after a certain point declines. So at a certain point of a reader hitting a paywall a number of times per month, their likelihood to subscribe will actually decrease. And we'll talk a little bit more about that analysis. Minimizing friction in the purchase process can have a significant positive impact on your subscriptions conversion rate. We saw that in Latin America, readers are generally a little bit more price sensitive than in other regions, but that there are opportunities to increase your average revenue per subscriber through differentiated pricing. And then finally, the prevalence of rewards clubs in Latin America leads to slightly different churn and engagement goals than in other regions. So more detail on each one of those takeaways in the report. Today, we're going to dive into 3 themes from those takeaways that we thought would be helpful to share with this broader group. And we kind of grouped them into 3 categories. First, the key engagement factors that drive the likelihood to subscribe or the propensity to subscribe. What are the engagement factors your news organization should be paying attention to as you think about what drives the willingness or likelihood to subscribe? Understanding your content strategy for subscriptions conversion, and we'll talk about Mather's approach towards that problem and some of the very interesting takeaways it led to in the context of our subscriptions lab. And then finally, we'll talk about how to optimize your paywall strategy. So we're going to jump into the key engagement factors driving subscriptions. And we're going to start off with the graph that you see here. And I'll turn it over to Arvid to explain a little bit about what we're seeing here and what are the kind of key factors or takeaways that folks looking at this graph should interpret.
Yeah, thanks, Arun. And and Rodrigo and Luciana and Natalia, very nice to see you again. It's kind of like a reunion of sorts. We actually, I think, kicked off this project, if you believe it, around this time in 2019. And we all, I think, came on site when we could travel without any challenges and met with everybody. And it was really just great for us just to see people in person and get kind of the, work through all the questions and challenges. So again, thanks again for organizing this webinar. But back to the kind of the exciting chart here. So so what we're showing here is essentially kind of an evolution of engagement that kind of follows a logical kind of path. And sometimes in practice, it may not always be quite as clean cut as, in this specific order, but in general, we see this as kind of the way that engagement usually builds. So first, it's really getting an email from a user. So converting somebody from anonymous to registered, or at a minimum, getting them to sign up for a newsletter. That in of itself is a huge impact on propensity to subscribe. It also, as I'm sure everybody knows, it kind of builds out your first party data, and it allows you to communicate with your readers directly as opposed to through kind of anonymous channels. So I think we've seen in Europe and South America, and in the last 1 or 2 years in the United States, the user registration walls really pick up steam. And I think that's, again, probably a widely underutilized tactic in the past, which is becoming kind of used a lot more frequently now. So that's kind of one of the most important things to do, is get that email. The next one there is habit. So I think there's been a lot of literature from the industry on this. It's really, if you get somebody to visit more than a couple times a month, that's a really important factor. We'll talk a bit about kind of some of the diminishing returns, as Arun said, in a couple of pages here. But once you get somebody to come to the site 1 time or 2 times, there's still a lot of value in getting them to kind of repeat and come to the site at least maybe once a week, or even 2 times a week if you can. So that's probably the kind of the sweet spot of habit. The third thing here, which is perhaps I've not seen as much kind of literature, but we've seen this in our propensity models across almost every publisher we worked with. And it's that content diversity. In other words, how many distinct topics a reader consumes over a month period. That's actually a huge impact once you've kind of established the email, identity, established a base level of habit. Beyond that is actually more impactful if you broaden the coverage of engagement as opposed to just kind of hitting the same repeat habit button. So it's a bit counter sometimes to some of the recommendation models we've seen out there, where if you're a sports fan, all you get is sports, as an example. So we think that there's perhaps some you know, a page view doesn't always equal propensity to pay. So I think that if you're a sports fan, that's great. Let's serve those sports articles to the user, but also introduce maybe one or two that are outside of sports or maybe adjacent to sports. And if it's a business article or entertainment or even a news article. So I think those are kind of the direct tactics that you all can take as marketers and directors of audience revenue, is to kind of expand the types of tactics you can apply once you've kind of established those baseline email habit and kind of broaden that engagement over time.
Great, thanks, Arvid. And I think that leads into, I think, this point that you just made, the importance of content breadth, which, to your point, I think historically we've seen a lot of studies that talk about the importance of collecting emails or newsletter subscribers and how they're significantly more likely to become paid subscribers. We've heard about the importance of visit frequency. But this point around content breadth, I think was particularly interesting and is one that I hadn't seen before. To kind of allude to the point that Arvid had made on the prior slide, here's actually a breakdown of that propensity to subscribe across the different factors. And you'll notice here, known user, that is the most important factor, accounting for 20% of a reader's likelihood to subscribe. And Arvid, it sounds like in the analysis you found that also known users were shown to have a 3-year lifetime value that was 3.5 times greater than an anonymous user. I was curious if you had any thoughts on why that might be the case and what really having someone's email address allows you to do in maturing your subscriptions model over time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a couple things. So that 3.4x greater LTV is really based on, you kind of combine sort of, you know, advertising and subscription value opportunity that you're getting from a known user. So it includes, you know, just a more sticky reader, someone who kind of will probably be more likely to be a repeat user as well, visit the site more frequently. You know, again, the tactics kind of that come out of that, of why they're more likely to pay, I think is mainly, you know, they've already kind of signaled that they're willing to engage in a relationship with your news brand in some form. If they give an email in exchange for a newsletter or registration to access, you know, a couple articles, they're already kind of, you know, signaling they're willing to explore, and as opposed to being kind of this, you know, peripheral or flyby user. So that alone is just such a valuable, I think, point for a marketer to say. It's almost the user signaling to the marketers, hey, I'm interested, you know, just take me 1 or 2 more steps and I'll pay. So that's kind of what they're really doing, is from a user behavior standpoint. I think the other thing is you're using different channels, and you have the ability to use not just the paywall on the website, but also use email in all its forms. You know, marketing emails, newsletter emails. You can do surveys, all kinds of engagement that you can kind of encourage through that email channel. And over time, even kind of expand that first party data collection. So if they're willing to give you over time, you know, other personal details, that's just more chances to personalize that messaging beyond just an anonymous reader. So I think that's kind of why you're seeing that sort of 20% impact on propensity.
Yeah, I think those are great tactics, and we've also seen across some of our other labs publishers who've used that newsletter channel as an opportunity to send their readers surveys to better understand, if they haven't already subscribed, what might be able to get them to subscribe, or what sorts of content really resonates to better meet their information needs. And I think, to your point, it's just this opportunity to create a direct relationship with those readers and mature the relationship and deepen it over time. And then I think we talked about the other point on the slide a little bit when we looked at the 3 categories of factors. I think this continues to be something that was really interesting to me, because, to your point, it does sort of flout the traditional kind of approach towards a recommended content engine, where if someone likes economic news, you keep showing them economic news, or if someone likes sports new content, you keep showing them sports content. this seems to suggest that there's actually that the perception of the value you're driving as a news organization and of your subscription increases with the breadth of what they're able to consume, not just necessarily the depth. That essentially a reader who sees you as someone they can go to for news content, and economics content, and sports content is probably more likely to subscribe than someone who just goes to you for sports content or economics content. Is that a fair way to kind of characterize that, Arvid?
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, and not to say that single topic readers are in any way, bad, or they don't subscribe, or they can't subscribe. But I think it's more of a, if I had to choose between, it's kind of like the choice between do I take, 3 anonymous users or 1 known user? I would take that known user. It's a 3x LTV, and you're still ahead. Would I take a 10 single topic readers, or maybe 5 multi-topic readers? I might go with the 5. Although, maybe not a discrete choice, but at least, that's sort of the, implication is there's probably a pretty big, again, you can create products too that are, catered, or newsletters that are catered to those single topic readers. So you can still kind of have that relationship with them and kind of build that propensity without necessarily impacting breadth immediately. So again, it's not a winner take all approach, but I think you can still have, that those tactics kind of evolve that engagement over time, if the customer is obviously given that opportunity and interested.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's maybe not the first thing that you recommend a publisher do. The publisher should still continue to focus on getting the emails, increasing the visit frequency, increasing the time spent per visit. But when you feel like you've gotten to a ceiling, it's probably a factor that you should, as a publisher, take a look at, and can maybe help get you all the way there.
And again, this is where segmentation data for us is super, super helpful, where you can kind of clearly say, hey, this is a single topic reader without an email. That's a customer segment. This is a single topic reader with an email. And there's perhaps different tactics there. And then there's the kind of the best of the best, which is multi-topic email, weekly user. And that's your kind of, probably small percentage, but obviously very likely to pay. But one thing I'll quickly mention before we move on here is that kind of those last few items there, the grade bars that are perhaps less than 5% of propensity. What's interesting is that the things that perhaps historically we think of as maybe important, like do you set a meter differently for desktop or mobile, or morning or afternoon, or in market, out of market? Frankly, those kind of sort of let's call it environmental or just device factors don't really matter as much. It's really more about the engagement on the user's terms and getting that email. So if they're local or non-local, doesn't really matter. Maybe there's perhaps some personalization on the offers. Like if they're local, you can offer a print subscription alongside the digital, absolutely. But in terms of the marketing and kind of how you apply the tactics with respect to kind of getting them to pay, there's really no difference if they're local, desktop, weekday, weekend. That doesn't really matter as much.
That's a really fascinating point too, because I think sometimes we see publishers really focus on maybe differentiating their strategies, mobile versus desktop, and local versus out of market. But this analysis would indicate that those are probably less important factors. And I think just even anecdotally, when we think about a lot of, even for local news organizations, oftentimes a significant portion of their subscribers can come out of market. Maybe people who used to live in that community and have gone on to move somewhere else and still want to remain connected to that local community they grew up in, and so subscribe to the newspaper. I can personally relate to that, being born and raised in Texas, but living in New York. I'm still subscribed to the Dallas Morning News. So I think this is a chart that I would just encourage all the publishers to spend some time with. And you can find it in the report and really kind of unpack what it might mean for your news organization, particularly in the context of what are the tactics you prioritized. And I think Arvid would recommend, and the Mather Economics team here would recommend, really starting off with focusing on that, on getting those emails, either through a registration wall or through newsletter subscribers, increasing that visit frequency, increasing that visit depth. So we're going to jump to, I think, a nuance around visit frequency in particular that I thought was really interesting. We oftentimes, at least what I've seen historically, is that visit frequency is the most important factor, engagement factor, and is the one that publishers typically will pay the most attention to in the context of boosting the likelihood to subscribe. But there's an interesting nuance to that, Arvid, and I was curious if you wanted to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, this was actually a pretty cool finding in the LATAM subscriptions lab, and we've kind of since then found this phenomenon, I think, across most of the other publishers we work with. So the chart on the left, what that is really showing is the 1, 2, 3, 4 up through 20 at the bottom there. Those are the number of days over a 30-day period that a user would visit. So as an example, on your first visit, you're kind of that just being on the site explains about a third, 30% of the propensity that you're going to achieve of that one kind of based on that one metric, just site visitation. You can see it kind of doubles to 60, about 2/3 around maybe 10 days. So you're kind of, just around there, 9-10 days. So that's where you kind of, reach 2/3 of the impact on propensity that you will just based on that user visits, metric. But you can see it kind of maxes out around 20 and really kind of reaches a point where on the margin, getting one more day or one more visit out of a user, you're kind of reaching your peak, somewhere between, I argue kind of 8 to 10, it's kind of where it starts to kind of drop off. Perhaps there's still some more juice to squeeze there up to maybe 15, but at that point it's, there's perhaps other tactics you can use. And that goes back to the first chart we showed, which is once you've kind of got that initial established habit of maybe, let's say 7-8 days a month, that's about every 3 days or so is the habit there. You really ought to expand your engagement tactics to content diversity. So again, I think that the chart here just kind of shows you kind of max out basically at 20 days. And I'd argue that around 10 days, you probably ought to start looking at other types of tactics. So it's definitely diminishing returns is real, I think across a lot of metrics, but even habit, I think, has its limits.
Yeah, it's a really
data too. Go ahead.
No, sorry. No, go ahead, Arvid.
I was just going to share quick other stats. So if you look at the data too, just the number of readers who read beyond 10 days, it's a very low percentage. So it's just so hard to get that extra couple of days out of a user once they're coming to the site, let's say every 1 or 2 days. So it's maybe about, I think for known readers, it's like 15% of known readers read beyond, 10 articles or beyond 10 days a month. For anonymous readers, it's even, it's less than, 0.1%, very small amount. So, in terms of, kind of getting fishing where the fish are, so to speak, there's probably better tactics to use. And you're chasing that last percentage if you're trying to push habit beyond that 10-day mark.
No, it's such a fascinating point. And I think another way to think about it is if the goal should be in trying to get as many of your readers to kind of come to your website maybe 2 times a week, it's less important to get those readers to come maybe 3 times a week. And so particularly if you're thinking about, as a news organization, you have discrete marketing resources, discrete resources to either push people to the website, really investing that on getting more of your folks to 2 times a week, as opposed to getting the folks who are already at 2 times a week to 3 times a week, is maybe a good way to kind of tactically think about how this kind of takeaway informs your strategy as you grow your subscriptions model.
Exactly. Right.
Great. So that's engagement, and of course there's more context and more detail in the report. But I wanted to move to another topic that I thought was really interesting and led to some very differentiated takeaways from the Latin America Subscriptions Lab, which was just understanding the path to conversion in a little bit more of a nuanced fashion. So I know, Arvid, you and the Mather team have put together this framework that you use to essentially group content types and understand what role different content topics or types can play in your subscriptions strategy and your premium content strategy specifically. Do you want to talk us through kind of this chart and how publishers should interpret it?
Yeah, this is I think this is kind of one of the unique things that we are able to do with some of the listener data that we collect through our platform, where we can kind of correlate both from a user engagement perspective and also an article perspective. What is that intersection of engagement and content? And I think it's kind of a unique way to look at it, where you're really giving the newsroom and even marketers the insights that perhaps go beyond that kind of simple engagement only view. So it's also looking at that kind of supply and kind of content production, how that impacts your value proposition. So what this is kind of, it's a framework that we've developed over the last couple of years, where we can kind of almost sort of position content topics in each of these 4 boxes based on sort of how they perform, kind of what kind of audiences they attract. So if you publish 1,000 articles in a month period, let's say, we can tell you precisely which articles attracted your high value core audience segments, kind of that top right quadrant, the folks that are key for the value proposition, the folks who are repeat users, known users, subscribers. So that's kind of where you're indexing highly on both the volume of that kind of high propensity, highly engaged user, and also the proportion of readers who read those articles. So that's kind of your sweet spot of lead with those articles, basically. The top left there, if an article has a maybe low proportion of high propensity readers, but still attracts a high volume of users in general, that's really good for both advertising and subscriptions. Perhaps not the content that you would necessarily want to set as premium, or even necessarily put behind a restrictive paywall, but certainly promote it on the homepage, promote it in newsletters, social media, and so on. Even AMP is a good channel for those kind of articles to get that top of funnel and kind of reach. The bottom right there, it's kind of the counter. So that's where we see articles that attract a high proportion of kind of your core target audiences, but just a low volume. So usually these are kind of these really hyper local stories that only perhaps people in that region, or people who are really engaged with the brand on a local level would engage in. And it's usually the ones where, or the content you can set to be subscriber only and really lock it down, because that's such unique content that they're not going to find it anywhere else. And it's very, very high value to those few, maybe niche readers. And again, we recommend that to be usually set or tested at least as premium or subscriber only content. And then there's kind of the last one there, the bottom left, which is sometimes not the most exciting, not most fun topic to talk about, but there are articles where sometimes you put them out there, you even promote them, and they're just not impacting subscriptions. And so then the question becomes, in terms of a broader content mix strategy for a publisher, is that okay? Or how many of those kind of non-subscription oriented articles will you produce, whether it's for brand awareness, or if there's a clear advertising or advertorial benefit, or if it's simply you must cover it because it's kind of part of your journalistic duty. So that certainly exists as a reason to have those kind of articles, but the question becomes, what is kind of that appropriate content mix across of these? And also, what is kind of just even knowing what it is in the current state is helpful for newsrooms. So if you can give an editor or a desk editor, hey, here's how your topics perform across these sections, and here's the volume of articles that fit across these different boxes. Is that okay? Does that fit with your broader goals as an organization? Are there opportunities to reinvest resources, maybe shift reporters around different topics, or so that's kind of the questions that we like to kind of ask. And I think the data here really helps just support those kinds of conversations in the newsrooms. It's really kind of helping, I think, just transform newsrooms from being kind of this, not knowing how content performs when it's in a print product. You don't really know if it's on page one on the front page, if it's really, that's what people read, or maybe it's 3 pages in or 6 pages in, you don't know in the print product, but in the digital world, you obviously know exactly what your core readers are engaging with, what are they not engaging with, and then again, make decisions based on that data.
Yeah, no, it's such a really helpful framework, and in particular, I know one of the questions I oftentimes receive from publishers is how they should think about their premium content strategy. What is the content that they should put behind the paywall? And I think this framework is really helpful in answering that question in particular. If you just kind of think about what sort of content falls in that bottom right-hand category, it's content where, you know, a lot of people aren't reading it, so it's not going to have a huge effect on your advertising revenue, or it'll have a negligible effect on your advertising revenue. But it is being deeply read, or it's being read by the people most likely to become subscribers. And so I think locking that content is just a really interesting, it's a really effective way to increase the value of your subscriptions offer. I'll also add the caveat here, and we mentioned this in the report, that at the end of the day, every news organization is mission driven, and it's beholden to serving the information needs of the communities it serves. And so this shouldn't be seen as a stop creating all of this content, start creating all of this content. It should more be seen as a way to understand the role of your content in the context of your subscription strategy. But you obviously, as a news organization, have values and a mission and a broader value proposition that you're looking to serve. And that should always be the North Star that you focus your newsroom and content strategy around. I like this next chart. This actually comes from the Latin American Subscriptions Lab and one of the publishers that we worked with in Brazil. It gives you kind of a sense of the framework that Arvid just talked about in the context of actual topics. And one of the interesting things to the point we just discussed, you'll notice here, economic content and a little bit political content are in that kind of premium content category. And this is actually something that I've observed, at least across a lot of publishers, is that economic or financial news tends to be a little bit more lucrative to your readers who are more likely to become subscribers, in part because it's information they're oftentimes willing to pay for. It's not maybe broadly interesting to everyone, but it's really important to folks or readers for whom that information helps inform maybe financial decisions they make. And it was interesting to see in the context of this publisher, kind of economics and politics fall in that bottom right-hand category. What was surprising to me was international news, at least in the context of this publisher, was something that wasn't driving a lot of traffic, but wasn't necessarily also attracting the readers who were most likely to become subscribers. The other thing I'll just call out about this chart is the size of the bubble indicates how much content is being produced on that topic. And so looking at this chart, you can certainly see there was opportunities to maybe rethink where resources were being put in serving certain topics if the goal was to optimize the subscription strategy. And of course, I'll make that caveat again. At the end of the day, the North Star should be the mission and the value proposition. But if you want to be entirely subscriptions driven, this framework can be a helpful sort of guide in thinking through the sort of content that really resonates with those most likely to become subscribers. Arvid, I was kind of curious if there's anything else that stuck out to you on this specific example.
Maybe 2 quick things. I think you hit the point exactly on kind of the politics, economics, and international. Those are kind of the main takeaways in that. Herais, if I'm saying that right, or Gerais, maybe. My Portuguese is very, very bad, so I apologize. But so that's kind of, I think, very local content about I think the kind of local state and kind of metropolitan area that they're in. So not surprising in that regard. The one thing I'll say just on that kind of largest bubble, international, at the bottom left, sometimes there's kind of a mix of articles that are in there. I think it's perhaps some wire service articles that are perhaps cheap to produce. But I think the broader point is not necessarily the cost of making an article, but just the attention of the newsroom on kind of putting that out there, and just the promotion of those articles on the homepage. The homepage and the newsletter, it's a finite space, and in terms of the user kind of engaging with it, above the fold, at least. So if you have a chance to, if a user comes to your site and all they see is international stories, obviously they're probably not going to see the value. So I was just kind of, again, the broader point is around just content mix and promotion of that content across your channels to emphasize or prioritize, in this case, politics, that local content and economia. That would be kind of where I'd just say that's kind of the decision making I make in the newsroom. The other point I quickly make is, we do see a pretty high percentage of content have no impact on that path to conversion. So in the South American kind of cohort, it was about 2/3 of content that was produced had no measurable impact, on actually converting a user. It's pretty similar in the United States, about 60% or so in the US. So there's still a lot of, I think, content being put out there, and perhaps just a lot of legacy inertia from publishers who are used to just covering everything, and they feel like they must cover every single topic and international and what's happening in all parts of the world. So I think there's perhaps just a discussion around, in that mission and North Star point that you made, Arun. It's sort of, what is your mission? Is it to be kind of the general newspaper, or is it to be that kind of local, paper of record for your community, for the things that people are willing to pay for? So that's kind of some of the questions that, again, we kind of bring up as part of this data analysis.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and to think it's knowing which 33, in this case, it's 33% of the content that did show up on that path to conversion. Knowing what types of articles are part of that 33% is super helpful from an editorial strategy, a newsroom strategy, a marketing strategy perspective. And I think this framework of first tagging your articles by topic and then seeing how those most likely to subscribe interact with it can be really helpful. We'll switch gears a little bit and talk finally about optimizing the paywall strategy. This was also just a really interesting takeaway from the lab, and I think is a takeaway that Arvid, you and the Mather team have seen across a number of the clients that you've worked with, which was, I think the general sense is that your most engaged users are going to be driving a majority of your conversions. In the case of this lab and what you've seen elsewhere, you also found that cookies or new cookies, essentially anonymous readers, also accounted for a significant percentage of conversions. And in the case of the LATAM subscriptions lab, if you looked at those anonymous readers and fanatics, they drove more than 80% of all subscriptions conversions. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that was surprising and what we might be able to infer from it?
Yeah, it was surprising the first time we saw it, but to your point, we kind of looked at the data across. Again, it's pretty consistent across all of our publishers. The maybe one time it maybe isn't consistent is when you have a very aggressive registration wall. So if you do have a lot of known users and very few anonymous users, or I guess relatively fewer anonymous users, then we don't see this kind of as much, but we do see this where there's still a significant amount of anonymous readers who hit the paywall and then have to decide to subscribe or not. So the reason for this is twofold. So one is that, we still, at least in 2021, a lot of tracking systems and paywalls rely on an anonymous cookie set by the browser. So I think they're just the nature of cookies. We all know that they're not necessarily maybe the most reliable kind of tracking tool. Again, they can work. We obviously just have to use them just due to the nature of digital kind of technology and ecosystem. But what really is happening here is that there are people or cookies who look like they're new, but in reality, they're actually repeat users. And so what's happening is that, maybe a paywall or a website might recognize this cookie as a new user, and mistakenly you would say, okay, let them have free access, or let them read the site for free for a number of days, or set the meter a certain way. But it turns out it's actually more impactful to set a very aggressive paywall on those users and drive the conversion. So you're able to kind of make the assumption that any new cookie, there's probably a large percentage of those users who are actually repeat users. In terms of how to kind of set the paywall strategy, you're still having the risk is still pretty low, even though that. And yeah, thanks for this, Rune. Sorry to skip ahead a little bit, but yeah, the risk is still pretty low because you're a true anonymous user, a true first-time user. They read maybe one article, two articles, maybe. So they're not going to read that many articles, and your paywall is not going to be the thing that stops them from consuming content. We had actually done this test, kind of the counter to that test, where we said, let's take every anonymous first-time user, let's give them 50 articles to read. And the expectation was they're magically going to read all these articles, you'll get all this ad revenue, it'll be great. But in reality, that just did not happen. So there's, to the very first point I think you made in the kind of 11 key takeaways, publishers overestimate dramatically the risk to advertising and page views, and they can take a much more aggressive stance on their paywall. The one sort of audience segment where you can perhaps be a little bit cautious is that kind of middle, kind of low engagement, medium engagement, where they're a repeat user, but they haven't quite reached a certain level of engagement, or they haven't given you an email. Those perhaps we see very few conversions from that middle group, but we see, again, the majority of conversions come from that first time cookie and that highly engaged repeat user.
Yeah, I like that you guys call it a rainbow, or you've referred to it in the past as a rainbow paywall strategy, because it kind of looks like a rainbow. But I think
squint a little bit, but you can see it.
Yeah, if you squint a little bit. But I think this kind of takeaway around being a little bit tighter with your more engaged readers, and then being tighter with those anonymous or new cookie readers, because either those new cookies are folks that are only going to come to your website once or twice per month, so they're not going to be impacted by the paywall, so your ad revenue for those readers aren't going to be impacted, or they're actually people who are highly engaged that you should probably be serving the offer to, and they're just masked. It's just a really interesting kind of takeaway. It also, I think, reinforces maybe indirectly the point around how important a known strategy is, or increasing your known readers are, particularly when you have so many anonymous readers. The extent to which you can take your highly engaged anonymous readers and get their email address it can be a really effective strategy also in deepening that relationship. And as we look at this prior chart, it is a significant portion of your reader base that falls into that kind of trend already. But this kind of trade-off between subscriptions and advertising revenue, and it's something that we've typically seen with a lot of the publishers we've worked with, particularly in Latin America. There is this hesitancy to be too tight with the paywall, or to lower the paywall. And even the null, if you have a dynamic paywall, the null settings tend to be also a little bit higher, in part because there's this fear that you're going to be driving away advertising revenue. And I think, Arvid, you and the Mather team have done some really interesting analysis to suggest that that fear might be overstated. Do you want to talk about this graph a little bit?
Yeah, this is actually the first thing when we first developed the listener data platform. This is one of the first things we realized, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, is that the way that the inventory is delivered, the ad inventory is delivered, is very kind of, it's not uniform. So in this example, what we're showing is real data from a publisher on a monthly basis, about $1 million in ad revenue per month in total. But when you start breaking down the inventory by type, you can see there's about a third maybe is sponsorship, so that is kind of the fixed cost, or site takeover. So it's really it's not really impacted that much by, losing a few page views on the margin here and there. Maybe 45% or so of the inventory or revenue is coming from non-article page views. So typically a publisher is not going to put a paywall on the homepage. Section fronts will not be paywalled. Sometimes photo galleries will be free, or video pages will be free. So again, there's a big percentage of revenue that comes from those sort of non-article page views that are accessible to any user. There's a few some revenue there from existing known users. So there is still maybe not significant, but still a worthwhile amount of revenue to account for that will not be impacted by existing subscribers who are already logged in and reading page views. So once you kind of subtract all those things, your total at-risk revenue, perhaps, and we've seen this pretty consistent, is around 25% of your total revenue is at risk if you put a very, very restrictive paywall. And you can further mitigate that at-risk number by using that rainbow model, or using personalization, or getting that registration ID. So there's ways you can kind of really make that risk zero effectively. And again, if you kind of manage the paywall settings by audience segments, you're basically, again, your risk is zero. But at worst case, it's maybe 25%. And there's just still, I think, a lot of opportunity for publishers to move that paywall to be much more restrictive than it is today.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because essentially what it's saying is you could put your in the case of this publisher, they could have put their paywall at, let's say, one article. So the only article that anyone could have read was the homepage article, and then immediately they would see the paywall. And even with a strategy that's that restrictive, which very few publishers are going to adopt, you're only seeing 25% of the advertising revenue at risk. So it does suggest, with a little bit of tinkering and testing and a little bit of personalization, and to Arvid's point around the rainbow strategy that you see here, you can effectively bring that risk down to zero. And maybe it's not a paywall of one article, but I imagine a paywall of 3 or 4 articles, and you could probably still recapture a lot of that advertising revenue that you've lost. And obviously that number is going to be different from publisher to publisher, so you should definitely test it in the context of your own organization and own audience. But certainly, you can there is a Goldilocks kind of solution here, where you can have the really robust subscription strategy and also continue to preserve your existing advertising business.
Yeah, the testing is key. And again, we're not advocating tomorrow just making a huge change without having data and thinking about it. But I think this is where you kind of end up. So just kind of giving you the runway to say, yes, there's room to test it, and there's probably a lot of upside on subscriptions. And if you're at 15 articles today, I would recommend doing an A/B test by segment, move it down to 10, move it down to 5, and just see what happens. So you can kind of control that risk very, very, very much using these tools.
Arvid, I also wanted us to talk a little bit about the paywall itself, and kind of the likelihood to subscribe connected to the number of times a reader hits that paywall. And I think this graph was also found very interesting. Do you want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing here?
Sure. Yeah, this is a pretty cool one as well, where we kind of similar to the kind of the visit frequency one. There's kind of a not a linear correlation with these kind of different user behaviors. So what we're showing here is in a given month or in a 30-day period, how many times did the user hit the paywall? And you can see kind of the probability sort of rise once they first hit the paywall, second time, third time, fourth time, up to about maybe 12 or so is kind of where we see the peak. Obviously, the hitting the paywall by itself is not an independent event. Like, they're obviously have a higher visit frequency. They have a higher they're trying to consume page views. They're perhaps more engaged than your average anonymous user. So but I think it kind of, again, there's a correlation between the paywall hits and the number of visits and days, of course. But what's interesting is that even controlling for that kind of habits, we see a pretty big decline in propensity to pay after that peak of about 12 times in a month. And you can see that that probability to subscribe actually goes lower than when they started after they hit the paywall 25 times. So if you have readers who they keep hitting that paywall over and over again, if they hit it more than maybe 10 or 15 times, I would suggest creating a kind of a high modal or high paywall hit segment, and perhaps changing the offer for that kind of right side of that chart for the people who are in that category, and changing the price point, changing the call to action, maybe saying, hey, we see you're trying to read this content. Let us give you this one article if you register, if they haven't registered yet. So it's just kind of maybe changing the marketing a little bit and personalizing for people, beyond that 12 or 15 paywall hits. But it's a pretty interesting, trend or kind of interesting pattern of behavior and propensity here.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I've seen some publishers with that segment of folks who are really hitting the paywall 10 to 15 times and still not subscribing. Also think about providing them with rewarded ads or kind of alternate revenue streams as well. But I think the first place that you'll probably want to start off with is seeing if you can differentiate the offer to make it a little bit more attractive, and understand probably a little bit more deeply why these readers who are clearly engaging your website enough times in a month to hit the paywall so often aren't willing to kind of take that final step. And it could be financial, it could be that they feel like their information needs are already met without needing to subscribe. But I think it's a really helpful way to kind of think about how to better engage that segment in the context of your overall subscription strategy. So I wanted to switch here to the A/B tests from the lab itself. And we have Natalia and Luciana here to talk a little bit about the experiments that they ran. We'll start off with Natalia from El Espectador in Colombia. And they ran a really great experiment around, essentially focused on retention, but running email campaigns for disengaging subscribers. Natalia, do you want to talk a little bit about this experiment and the results you saw?
Claro, muchas gracias, Arun. Gracias por la invitación, encantada de estar con ustedes nuevamente. Bueno, esto es un experimento del que hemos aprendido muchísimo. Es muy sencillo y también económico, entonces recomiendo que lo repliquen en sus medios. Lo que hicimos básicamente, gracias al Listener y al equipo de Matter, fue medir el comportamiento, claro, de nuestros suscriptores en términos de engagement, con ciertas métricas de engagement como las que vimos en las barras amarillas que nos mostró Arbit antes. Y lo que hicimos fue comparar el comportamiento que llevan en un periodo más extenso, digamos en un mes, con el de los últimos 8 días de estos segmentos de suscriptores. Y de esta manera mirar cuáles de estos suscriptores han bajado su número de engagement y su comportamiento, pues, visitando al periódico. Y de esta manera sacábamos un reporte este es el grupo semanal de suscriptores quienes sus métricas de engagement han sido más bajas durante esta semana frente al promedio que llevaban, y creamos un correo electrónico que le llamamos para suscriptores dormidos precisamente, y con un copy tratamos de jugar con muchos copies. El que vemos aquí es el primer copy que lanzamos, pero este mail ha cambiado y tiene un diseño pues más sofisticado en este momento y con otro tipo de copies. En este momento pues el que vemos en pantalla dice ¿por qué tan perdido?, que es una forma muy coloquial para decir como ¿por qué qué te has ido? ¿Por qué no has regresado? Y lo que queríamos era decirle a los suscriptores, recordarles que tienen su suscripción, porque pues como hemos visto en los reportes y en la experiencia de otros medios, los suscriptores que menos visitan el sitio con menos frecuencia son los que más posibilidades tienen de retirarse y de cancelar su suscripción. Entonces la idea es recordarles que tienen una suscripción, que regresen y de esa manera también aumentar estas métricas de engagement, pues que son muy importantes como para medir, ¿no? Entonces, de esa forma, hicimos esta prueba durante los meses de Mother, 2 meses, en la cual aquí están los resultados en la reducción del churn, y es una práctica que continuamos hasta este momento. Continuamente estamos haciendo este balance y semanalmente el equipo de datos recibe los correos de los suscriptores que están bajando su comportamiento en lectura, y les enviamos una nota que selecciona el coordinador de newsletter, y él dice, bueno, quizá este puede ser interesante. Los parámetros para escoger la nota tiene que ser como una nota propia del periódico, que tenga un alto interés de la agenda informativa del momento, pero que sí muestre como la calidad del periodismo que nosotros queremos hacer énfasis y decir como, hey, por esto es que importa pagar la suscripción en El Espectador, ¿no? Entonces, entre los resultados que encontramos, además de los que nos compartió Mader, nosotros también estamos midiendo cuál fue el comportamiento en el correo electrónico, y uno de los datos más interesantes es que las personas que una vez abren este correo electrónico siguen visitando el periódico. Entonces, no solamente visitan el artículo que recomendamos en este caso, sino que visitan más artículos de la página, y ahí tiene que ver con la diversidad de contenido que hablaron al comienzo de la charla, porque si bien esta es una nota de salud, las personas entraban a ver qué sucedía con este tema del medicamento y veíamos que resultaban leyendo deportes, economía internacional. Entonces, lo de la diversidad es importantísimo, y realmente esta es una acción muy sencilla a los suscriptores dormidos con la que podemos recordarles, como vuelvan al espectador en este caso y recuerden por qué tienen esta suscripción. Entonces, este fue un test que nos pareció maravilloso, y de esta manera lo continuamos y así hemos mantenido nuestro churn rate, que está en el 5%, que es un buen churn. Y bueno, la verdad les recomiendo que lo copien y lo repliquen en sus propios medios.
No, gracias, Natalia. You know, it was a really thoughtful experiment, and to your point, a very easy one to implement, and that I'd recommend all publishers test out to see if it makes sense in the context of your own news organization. But it is a really effective experiment and tactic to rekindle that relationship with subscribers that, for whatever reason, might be disengaging with your publication. I'll turn it over now to Luciana from Stadao, of course, in Brazil, to talk a little bit about kind of their journey through the dynamic paywall during the subscriptions lab. So, Luciana, turning it over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, we implemented the dynamic paywall during the GNI subscription lab. Actually, we identified that was very necessary to segment our audience. So we started to do some segmentations. Here we have like 4 segments that we started in our dynamic paywall. So the first one, we created the anonymous one. As Aaron and Arvid already showed to you, it's very important to help the customer to provide more information for us. And with this information, we can provide a better offer and a better content for them. So we started to stimulate this customer to provide at least the email, and with this email, we can do like segmentation and provide a specific offer for them. The second segment that we created was the registered one. So we improved our navigation flow to help the customer to provide this information for us. And with this information, we started to test some messages. So we started to collect the email and try to convince this customer to subscribe to a newsletter or to send more information for us regarding the navigation process. So we started to do those tasks with the registered users, and we saw a very good increase in our newsletter subscriptions, for instance. The other important part that we divided was the subscribers and the ex-subscribers. So for the subscribers, we started to do like our engagement role during the navigation process. So we started to send some important message for them. So for example, do you have our app installed? This is for the subscribers, or something related to the content. And we are trying to do more of that to maintain these users with us. So to not only the people to help with the selling process, but also to help with the churning process. And for the ex-subscribers, we implemented the hard paywall. So we included the hard paywall for them, and try in this message of the hard paywall to show the value that the customer missed during the time that they are not more our subscriber. So we did those tests during the lab, and not only during the lab, we are still doing some tests with this segmentation. And some of the results that we collected during the lab, we had an increase of 8% of the test group, because the conversion rate was very was a little bit more successful than in the control group. So we saw this result. And also we saw that the high propensity user is converting more and more. So if we try to change some messages, or we try to change the number of articles, this also increased the conversion rate. So this was very, very good to see. And I will just want to put another information that is not here in the chart, because Arun and Arvid showed the information about the articles that help the conversion during the conversion process. In our case, we have the same numbers, and we started to work on that after the lab. Or what I mean is that we are exchanging the information with the newsroom, and we are trying to create a strategy that is really related to that information. So we are not, we are trying to not increase the number of articles that does not help in the conversion process, and we are doing a work very closely to them to help on the creation of the content that will do the difference during the conversion process. So I just want to mention about that, because I think that is very interesting also.
No, that's really interesting, Luciana. Thank you. I'm curious, because that's a challenge that we've heard from a number of the news organizations we've worked with. How do you start that conversation with the newsroom or the editorial side, which might be hesitant to have data inform the kind of editorial and content strategy? And it sounds like in Dao's case, like you were able to at least start off sharing the data and the information to kick off that conversation. But I'm curious how you navigated it and built that relationship, so that, because I know a story I've oftentimes heard is it can be a very challenging and difficult conversation to have, and was curious how you had it in the case of Stabao.
Yeah, what we are doing, we created like new structures, not more based on departments. So, for example, we don't have more only the newsrooms, the product team, and the IT team. We are trying to create like a multidisciplinary team, like a squad. When inside these squads, we have the product owner, the journalist, the business intelligence, the developers, user experience team, working together with clear objectives and also with clear goals. So in this team, we have the information of how many articles are contributing to the conversion rate, what are those articles. So with this team working together, we saw a very good way to work because we are seeing the results. And I think that my role is the bridge between the newsroom and also the subscription team. So I'm with this role to build that, to put this together, right?
No, it's a very important role, but I think it's also such a great example of how to break across the silos that,
yeah,
particularly in traditional newsrooms, are going to have developed over a very long period of time, and creating these cross-functional teams around unified missions and unified objectives, I think is a way to very organically break through those silos and create a little bit more of a bridge and a connection between the editorial and the business side. So that's great to hear. Rodrigo, I'll turn it back over to you if you want to facilitate the question and answer session, and I'll stop sharing here. But that's the thrust of our presentation. I know there's a lot of content there. You'll get a deep dive and all the additional detail in the report that Rodrigo will be sharing out later this week. So Rodrigo, turning it back to you.
Great, thanks Arun, thanks Arvid. Really impressive key findings that you've shared, and like you say, Arun will be sharing a link to the report later today, so everyone can download it. We do have some questions from the audience, but maybe before we jump to them, and since we have a bit of around 12 minutes of questions, I want to ask some questions directed to Luciana and Natalia. Some of them are in line with some of the questions of the audience, but basically, maybe a brief question on where are you guys standing right now in terms of the paid content strategy. If you could share maybe some numbers in terms of the digital subscribers you have, and what are the immediate sort of goals that you have set for the coming months. Could you share some of that information with us? Natalia, we can start with you if you want.
Okay. Bueno, nosotros completamos los 3 años de suscripciones en marzo y creo que nuestro reto inmediato es pues ya tener un indicador clave de Customer Lifetime Value de 3 años de todo lo que ha sido el negocio y lo que hemos aprendido en este tiempo, y estamos muy enfocados en tener este indicador porque esto nos va a permitir tomar decisiones más específicas y mucho más claras, bien sea sencillas como en qué lugar debe ir un banner publicitario, o si reemplazamos ese banner publicitario por un espacio de newsletter, por ejemplo, o algo mucho más complejo como dónde invertir. Entonces creo que ese es nuestro reto inmediato, inminente, y es tener este indicador de Customer Lifetime Value ya con los datos de 3 años, que es una enseñanza y pues una ganancia grandísima como haber llegado hasta este punto en el espectador. Y bueno, y de cifras generales, pues desde el año pasado hemos tenido un crecimiento impresionante año tras año, casi que 190% año tras año crecimiento de suscripciones. Nuestra base ya está superando los 20,000 suscriptores que para ser pioneros en el negocio de suscripciones digitales en Colombia y ser el primer medio grande que nos lanzamos y nos arriesgamos con esto, pues creo que es un número significativo. También tenemos el reto de cookies, pues de no cookies, entonces estamos en un proceso fuerte de registro y la información y la experiencia de Luciana va a ser muy valiosa para continuar pues con el trabajo que llevamos. Ahí vi en el chat también que nos preguntaban sobre nuestro churn. Estamos en el 5%. Hacemos unos ejercicios constantes como en el equipo de call center, como de llamar y preguntar por qué se van, asimismo saber por medio de las encuestas, digamos de newsletter o de otro tipo de encuestas, cuáles son esas razones de por qué quieren irse y tratar de convencerlos de continuar. Entonces estamos haciendo como un detalle muy puntual de las personas que no pueden renovar su suscripción, averiguar por qué y ver de qué manera podemos como convencerlos. Entonces eso hace que nuestro indicador de churn sea bueno, pues en medio de la industria. Por otro lado, otro de los logros y que creo que es una enseñanza es mantener suscripciones a largo plazo, ¿no? Sabemos que en el mundo internacionalmente funciona muy bien las suscripciones periódicas de mes, por ejemplo. Sin embargo, nosotros desde hace unos años empezamos con las suscripciones de 2 años y hicimos unas campañas de promoción por el aniversario y ofrecimos la campaña, el paquete de 2 años y ahora tenemos el 93% de nuestra base de suscriptores con suscripciones de 1 año o 2 años. Entonces, esto es muy bueno porque también nos ayuda como a mantener estos indicadores de retención y de churn, pues buenos y también mantenemos una relación como sólida con nuestros suscriptores. Entonces, tenemos ahora el plan básico mensual. Estamos haciendo también como una invitación a hacer una prueba gratis. Sin embargo, lo que hemos visto es que las personas prefieren mantener una relación a largo plazo. Entonces, creo que enfocar hacia esas relaciones a largo plazo es algo clave como en el modelo de suscripciones y nuestra tarea, por supuesto, la más difícil es la retención. Entonces, en retención tenemos unos retos grandísimos como fortalecer las comunidades, por ejemplo, newsletter, desde el año pasado creamos un equipo, todo la redacción está haciendo parte de la curaduría de esta información y queremos, al igual como hizo Estado, comenzar un proceso de equipos multidisciplinares. Sabemos que es difícil, sabemos que tiene muchos retos porque ya existen unas lógicas dentro de la redacción de trabajo, pero nos encantaría empezar como con equipos multidisciplinares y quizá empezar a apuntarle como a distintos momentos del funnel de conversión, ¿no? Entonces, quisiéramos ir por esa línea, creo que ese es uno de los retos y de lo que viene hacia el futuro, pues, pero ahí vamos.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Luciana, you want to share some info on where Estado is standing right now in terms of your strategy?
Yeah. I can't comment about the numbers, but I will tell a little bit about the strategy that we are working. We are really focusing on this strategy of the breaking the silos, as Aaron said, because now we have 7 teams that are working on that strategy. So we have one team working in the audience, other working with the conversion, other with the engagement, and in the product side, we have one team focusing on the website, the current website, the other one focusing on the app, and the third one focusing on the how we be the new website of Estadão. And also we have one that is in a specific content topic that we are trying to see if this works or not, because we saw the information about the importance of the value proposition of the content. So we are trying to do that in a specific team. We are also investing a lot in 2 different products. One is our app we have an app that we developed. We started last year, and now we are focusing a lot in this app. Today, this app is totally exclusive for the subscribers, and we don't have advertisement in this app. So we are working very closely, not only with Google for the Android part, but also with Apple to provide the best app that we can here in the region. And the second important product for us is the newsletters. We built a new newsletter that before we created the newsletter, we talk with the customers to understand what they need. So we created this very specific to attain those needs. So this is I think that the change that we are doing, this strategy, is to put the customer inside our day-by-day discussion. So we have twice a month, we talk with our subscribers. So we select some subscribers to talk with them, to understand the satisfaction, to understand what we can create in terms of product and develop the strategy based on that. So I think that those are the important points that we are working on right now.
Great, thanks. There's several questions from the audience. There's a question regarding if you could share conversion rates. What is the conversion rates that you've seen, sort of, and it can be for the four of you. Is there some sort of average conversion rate that you could share for the cohort, or that you've seen in the region? I don't know. Or yeah, thanks, Arvid.
Yeah, and this is actually what the report we alluded to earlier. We will be sharing the report very soon. It has some of the benchmarks. To give you a number very quickly, give me 2 seconds. So there's a couple of ways we measure conversion. So one is sort of an overall conversion ratio. So it's kind of total conversions divided by total unique users. And we kind of usually, explain that on a per million basis. So how many new conversions did you get in 1 month divided by unique users times 1 million? That's kind of the calculation. So in our the median across kind of our benchmark database is about 463 conversions per million unique users, 463. For the cohorts that we worked with in South America, that number is 138 conversions per million unique users. So again, much lower than the kind of global average. I think the points on price elasticity and just obviously other challenges are valid. So the kind of the benchmark, I think, is about 138 divided by per million users. I'll give you a quick other stat. The conversion rate from the paywall, the median is around 0.25%. So that's kind of people who only hit the paywall, and of that group who convert, 0.25%. In South America, it's about 0.2. So again, a little bit lower, but closer to that kind of global average.
Great, thanks, Arvid. We have time for one more question, and there are several questions that have been said by the audience that are related to local content, and how can that potentially be a path to conversion and a path to key value proposition. From your experience, have you been able to confirm something of the sort? There's like three or four questions that mentioned the matrix you showed, and how there was, for example, economics or politics, and that converted. But is there specific information that you've seen specifically on local that you would say can convert? So that's something also we've seen here in Mexico, as many regional news companies are tempted to pivot towards digital, to reader revenue. They believe that maybe focusing on local content can be sort of a differentiator and help them produce quality content that people are ready to pay for.
Absolutely, and I think local content is definitely in that kind of top left, top right, bottom right quadrants, it's definitely an important one. And actually in that chart we showed earlier, that matrix, that very top bubble, I think it was Gerais, I'm sorry for the pronunciation there, but I think that is actually the local states, like the local content and how they've tagged it. So it's maybe not called local specifically, but it is that kind of local content. And if you look at kind of that, we mentioned 66%, 2/3 of content produced doesn't impact conversions. If you further drill down on that 33% that does impact, there's a much higher proportion of those local stories that are in that 33%. So it's probably within local content, it's maybe more than half will impact path to conversion. But in aggregate, of course, it's 2/3. If that makes sense.
And I think it was.
I think that clarifies, because Gerais, I think not everyone understood that could actually mean local content. So that definitely clarifies.
Right.
Yeah, it refers in that case to Minas Gerais. So it's a regional newspaper, and that's the regional content. I mean, I think there's a kind of a broader conceptual point here, is that in an information ecosystem where information is increasingly commoditized, really a strong subscriptions value proposition is the foundation is differentiated information that people are willing to pay for, and local is differentiated. If you're the only newspaper or one of the only newspapers covering news in a particular, tied to a particular geography, whether it's local or regional, that's something unique and different that you provide that others don't. And even in the context of the example we looked at with the international kind of topic area being at the lower left-hand side, that makes sense in some sense, because if you're going to that local paper, you could probably find international news in a lot of different sources, but what made that particular paper unique and different and drove the relationship with readers was it covering issues and news that very few other sources, if any, covered. So I think it's a looking at local can be a really helpful strategy as you evolve your subscriptions model.
Great, thanks, Arun and Arvid. We need to wrap up, but I think it would be interesting to, like, in a nutshell, if the four of you could share a bit of, after these 2 years of work, some advice to those that are seriously considering launching a paywall or reader revenue strategy. At least here in Mexico, we see this as a pivot that is coming. 90%, more than 90% of media companies do not have a paywall. It's just something quite new, but they're seriously considering it. So maybe in a nutshell, the four of you could share some advice on what are the steps to take, what is needed to take the leap into this path that is, of course, risky, that can lead to some anxiety, especially considering that they can lose some of the revenue coming from advertising. If you could share that, and we can wrap up with that question, with those answers.
Vale.
Maybe we can start with Natalia.
Gracias. Quisiera comenzar con la relación que hablábamos de lo local, y pienso en la perspectiva y confiar en esa perspectiva o ese punto de vista que tiene nuestro medio frente al resto, y esto tiene que ver con la propuesta de valor que nosotros estamos ofreciendo como medio. Entonces siento que es muy importante confiar en ese punto de vista, porque lo vimos nosotros ahorita con las manifestaciones y el paro nacional, que es un tema local, pues, del país, pero la perspectiva o el punto de vista que nosotros dimos frente al cubrimiento de las protestas, que era un hecho que todos los medios estaban cubriendo, y este fue un motor de suscripciones impresionante. Tuvimos metas que no habíamos alcanzado antes en suscripciones solo por el cubrimiento de un hecho, y creo que tiene que ver muchísimo con la propuesta de valor de nuestro medio frente al resto, ¿no? Entonces, confiar en esa propuesta de valor, tenerla clara, contársela a la audiencia, recordarles cuál es ese perspectiva o cuál es ese punto de vista o esa propuesta de valor que nosotros tenemos como medio frente a nuestra competencia y por qué somos únicos en el cubrimiento de un mismo hecho que todos los medios lo tienen y para nosotros fue magnífico ver cómo el cubrimiento y la calidad periodística que ofrecimos en el hecho de las manifestaciones que acabamos de tener durante casi un mes fue un motor de suscripciones impresionante, que no había campaña de mercadeo o una modificación en producto que lograra ese número. Entonces, recordar esa propuesta de valor es fundamental y creo que confiar en eso es como un buen consejo para lanzarse y empezar a hacer. Y viene adicionalmente otros temas relacionados con tener un buen equipo de datos que nos ayude a soportar, hacer un buen estudio de proveedores también, ver cuánto nos cuestan los proveedores versus lo que nosotros podemos invertir y este tipo de cosas, pero sí, mi consejo creo que va a quedar como en confiar en esa propuesta de valor y recordarla a la audiencia constantemente, porque al final es esa calidad y esa mirada por la que la gente va a pagar frente a otros medios que también están en el mismo mercado, ¿no?
Great, thank you, Luciana. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that what Natalia said was very, very nice. And I can complement with something that I think that the most important part is to be open for experimentation. So we need to put a paywall and be able to test different strategies like number of articles, segment the audience, content strategy. So I think that this is the most important part. And as you saw in the report, the advertisement risk is very low. So if I was a publisher that don't have a paywall strategy, I would try to start with 10 articles and see what will happen with the audience and also with the advertisement. And you can start to prove and to test those strategies.
Thanks, Luciana. Arvid and Arun, your thoughts after having worked with 8 publishers and more?
I think Natalia and Luciana said, I think very, very well. You know, the thing I see frequently when launching paywalls is the challenge of just alignment across the different teams. So between the leadership, you know, the newsroom, marketing, technology, you know, basically the whole kind of organization really aligned around that North Star, which is if it's subscriptions, you know, then everyone needs to be aligned around that. So I think that's maybe one of the bigger organizational things we see that's always a point of friction. Beyond that, I think, you know, the second is kind of shifting from a product-oriented perspective of serving print away from that and serving the customer who is across platform. So your content is valuable. It's irrespective of if it's in a newsletter, if it's in a print product, if it's in an e-edition, on a website, it doesn't matter what the platform is. It's really from a user experience perspective, you're serving content to that reader and thinking about how the reader is going to be experiencing it. So you make decisions based on that as well. And of course, from our perspective, we always want to take a data-driven approach. So I think I love the point on A/B testing Luciana made, and just always test and segment and personalize and learn. So those are my maybe three big things.
Yeah, no, it's a real, Rodrigo, when you mentioned it's been 2 years. I think in the pandemic reality, sometimes it feels like 10. But I think first of all, it's just been such a pleasure to get to work with your team, with Arvid and the Mather team, and all eight publishers in Latin America. There's just a lot of intelligence and passion and a love for the communities that each one of the publishers serve. I think what Arvid and Thalia and Luciana said really hit on all the right notes, and I would just reinforce. Today we talked a lot about tactics that any publisher and all publishers should think about to really get kind of the foundation set and make sure you have your Reggie wall, or you're getting your newsletter subscribers, and you're being thoughtful about your paywall. all of that. But what's actually going to be fundamental to success is what Natalia mentioned, and that's the value proposition. It's, are you focused, hyper-focused on meeting the information needs of the communities that you serve? And can you become essential to those readers? And I think if you can become essential to those readers, and what we've seen is if you can become essential to even 2 out of every 100 readers, 3 out of every 100 readers that come to your website, enough that they're willing to pay for a monthly subscription, that can help you on your pathway to sustainability. And it really starts with deeply understanding your readers, what their information needs are, and how your content and your journalism can help support it. Because I think in a chaotic, increasingly complex world, the role that information plays in helping us just navigate this ever-evolving reality we're in has never been so important. So you play a vital, essential role in your communities. It's a question of being able to communicate that more effectively, and really focusing on how you can deepen that relationship with your readers. You get that right, that's probably 80% of the battle, and then you implement some of the tactics we talk about, and I think you can feel confident that you're on the right path for long-term success.
Thanks, Arun. We were a bit late, 10 minutes, but I think that was worth it. I think I did a quick list. Number one, value proposition, like you said, Arun, hyper-focus on information needs and try to become essential for that most loyal audience. And then number two, be open for experiments and work with data, like Arvid mentioned. Be ready to test, segment, and learn. Three, alignment of the whole team. So the marketing team, the tech team, the editorial team, everybody needs to be aligned in this subscription strategy. And a shift maybe on the product focus. So not only think that there's a print platform or print product, but actually focus on the user needs, the customer centric, and the rest needs to revolve around that. So I think with that we can wrap up. It was great to have you guys on board to be able to wrap up this project with a session. Again, we'll be sending the recording of the session. We'll be sending the report as well to the participants, and also stay alert for announcements. We'll be sharing this on our different social media accounts, from Google, from Mather, and from WAN-IFRA. Again, thank you, Arun. Thank you, Arvid. Thank you, Natalia, Luciana, and the whole WAN-IFRA team for the logistics. We have here a short survey. If you can share with us, it's always good for us to keep learning and improving our virtual events. Hopefully, the next time we'll see each other will be in person. I really hope so. And again, happy to have you on board, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks again.